Hey guys, it's rdbigdog. Alright, well, this video, what I'm going to bring to you is the first one of a series where I'm going to show you how to take your new player decks, your brand new account, your new player of the game. Let's take these new starter decks and let's get you to Field Marshal. It's one of the most common questions we see when you guys come into chat and in our streams, and you're asking us during the streams to say, oh, can you build me a deck please? And I say, yeah, absolutely, we can build you a deck, but what cards do you have? And how can we make all the chemistry work? It takes a bit of time, so what I thought would be best is let's make these videos that will help us show you how to improve these decks for each nation so you can get to Field Marshal and get the maximum rewards every season. So this video will be USA. I'll take you through the USA starter cards that you get into the USA starter deck that they give, and then how to change that deck pretty much completely into a winning deck that will take you all the way through to Field Marshal with very little investment in resources. And I did this with this deck going from 1-star captain all the way through to Field Marshal with only 2 losses, swept right through all the way. The deck was unstoppable, and for you it'll be unstoppable as well. I've got all those games in the video so you'll be able to see them and see how I played it out, and you'll be able to learn from seeing it and then execute it yourself to get those Field Marshals done. Right? Enjoy the video, hit the subscribe and like button down below so that I get that feedback that you like the video. I'll keep the series coming. Leave some comments if you have any suggestions about the deck. Is there cards that you like, you don't like, any substitutions you would make? If you're missing a card, you could comment about what you put in its place. It'd be great to hear your feedback and get that dialogue going and help everybody out. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through all the USA cards. These are the 40 cards you get for USA as a brand new player out of the box. No changes whatsoever. These are the 40 cards you have once you unlock USA. And so you can see the list shows 39 out of 40. That's because the 40th card is your HQ. That always fools players up in the beginning. Where's my 40th card? It's your HQ. Alright, so going through this list, we're just going to talk about what cards are good, what cards are not. So USAC's in here, given infantry or tank +1/+1. Not a bad card for a starting player. It gives a good buff to a unit. It can make a difference for you. Eventually in the game, this becomes more of a niche card, serving purposes in little meme decks like the L640 decks, for example, with Italy as an ally. But in general, this card here doesn't see a lot of play, but you might find it helpful in the beginning. Overwhelming Force. This is a card that has not a bad effect. It could remove the guard off a unit that is blocking the HQ, so you can do damage or remove a pesky bomber or artillery or something. So clearing the guard is really good, and obviously some of the other things that get cleared, ambush and fury and destruction, all very good effects to remove. However, the card is kind of specific in a sense, like it's not always going to get good action, so it sometimes ends up just being a brick in your hand, taking a card slot in your deck. But in the beginning, it might find some good use and be useful for you. The 463rd Battalion is a good one-drop. It's probably one of the better one-drops infantry-wise that USA has. They deal 1 damage to a random enemy in the same front. So, and you have to remember, if you only have one enemy in the front that you attack, it'll do a 2-bang on them because the random will go on the same one enemy that's there. So you get two hits on the one for the 1 credit. So this is actually really good infantry. You'll see a lot of play as a one-drop for USA. AWOKEN Giant is a removal card. Deal 2 damage to target, only in the front line though. If you destroy it, you get to card draw. So it does have a bit of card draw to it, but there's a lot of specific requirements you got to have here. It's got to be in the front line, and you got to be able to kill it, or you're not getting a card draw. But the 2 damage can be helpful sometimes. You just have to play your attacks properly to try to line it up so you could use this card to trigger the card draw, because that's really where its biggest value is. As you grow as a player with your collection, this card will slide out of your deck. You won't see it as very often at all. The M8 Greyhound is a super good tank. It's a staple in most USA decks. The 1/3 body, giving the support line the +1 buff, is just really strong. Any planes, bombers, artillery in the support line will get that attack buff as long as your Greyhound's in the front surviving. So, and with the blitz, you could set up your support line, and if you can clear the front line, you could just blitz him to the front and then attack with your support line. Super useful tactic. It puts a lot of punch behind your support line. 506 Airborne, nothing special here, just the vanilla infantry. It will never get played. But the 506th is actually a neat airborne infantry. If you've ever seen Band of Brothers, the 506 is who's featured in that movie. And it's pretty cool stuff that they did do in the war, but they're not going to be very cool or effective in this game. T19 HOWITZER. So looking at this card, and comparing it to Overwhelming Force. While Overwhelming Force can remove Smokescreen, Fury, Ambush, and Destruction, Destruction is very useful against cards like Japan that have that burn effect. But otherwise, just removing Guard is probably the strongest part of it right now in the early stage playing of the game for early players. So the T19 Howitzer gives that effect. By attacking a guard, it removes the guard, freeing up your abilities for your other frontline units or support line planes to be able to hit the HQ or whatever you want to attack that's being guarded. So you get the effects of an Overwhelming Force on the guard unit, plus you have an artillery that doesn't receive damage back, that could dole out damage. And when you throw an M8 Greyhound into the front, now your artillery is hitting it for a 2-punch instead of a 1-punch. So you could get some synergies here that makes the T19 Howitzer fit better in your deck than Overwhelming Force will. War Machine. USA has a huge archetype called Ramp, and Ramp is trying to accelerate your credit count faster than your opponent and even above and beyond the minimum later in the game, or beyond the maximum in the game. And but early right now in the starter cards, like this just has nowhere to play right now. It's just a dead card right now in your game until you get later on when you actually have units that are more expensive, that are valuable, that are worth ramping into. The 75mm pack is not a very good artillery, has no extra special effects. It's just a vanilla artillery with 1 HP and it costs 3 credits to put it out. Super expensive and not a very good card. Alright, so 11th Infantry, fully repair friendly unit, can be a very useful card if you have some of the bigger units on the board, for example. Maybe your Shermans, or if you're using the Mustang, or any other big unit from any other ally. If you have British as an ally, they have a lot of big units, and they would be able to heal it once it's damaged. So you could attack with it, take damage, and then drop this guy onto the board and get a heal effect out of it. So that could be super useful. P-40 Warhawk. This is a pretty good plane. It usually will trade up for you because it has a +3 attack against ground units. So it will definitely pack a punch and clear out, you know, the 5.5s, the 5.4s, the 4.5s, all those big body infantry or tanks that are out there with the +3. It only costs 3 credits to put out, 2 operation costs, so it's usually a pretty good plane. You might look for things like maybe Airacobra down the road if you can get into Theater's War expansion and do the campaigns to get those. That would be an upgrade on this card for sure, because it takes 2 less damage back from the attacking, reciprocated damage back from the unit it attacks from ground units. 30th Regiment, just a vanilla infantry, 3 cost, 4/4, 1 operation cost. It's not a bad body. It's a decent card to put out there. On turn 3, a 4/4. Turn 4, it's moved into the front line. That's a decent sized body to have to deal with. So it's not a horrible unit at all for early in the game. Doesn't see much use later in life in the game when you grow your collection, but in the beginning it's not a horrible body. Death from Above is just one of the S tier removal cards in the game. Definitely want to craft these guys and fill your collection up with these as soon as you can. Definitely, you know, the randomness is there, destroys a random enemy unit, so sometimes it's, you know, you're flipping the coin and holding your breath, but a lot of other times you could actually clear units with your other guys on the board and then drop Death from Above as a last play to get the one that you want, or at least increase the chance of hitting the one you want. So yeah, Death from Above for 4 costs to destroy a unit is pretty useful. I find early in the game, holding on to one of these is super useful early in your cards collection, in your career, we'll say, because a lot of guys will get the big expensive tanks and drop those down and consume all their credits, so they drop 1 unit on the board, then you're guaranteed to wipe it with a Death from Above, so it's a pretty good trade. The Sherman, one of the super strong USA tanks. The Sherman gives you the 2-card draw if you have a US unit in the front line, and with a 4/4 body and the card draw is just it's almost a snap include in most USA decks. You're going to see a lot of Shermans playing against USA decks in this game. It's just a great unit. 8th Cavalry. It's not a great unit. I mean, the 4/5 body isn't horrible for 4 costs to put it out. Your HQ is immune to damage on your turn. The one case where this card is actually really useful is against a deck like Japan, when they got the burn damage and you're killing off those Akitas and the Mitos and the Taipei regiments and the Hayabusa planes, or even at the Signal regiment, and you're killing the other guys' units. Your HQ won't take any of the burn damage, so that's super useful case for this card, but really against any other other opponent, this card doesn't really offer a whole lot. The 2 operation cost is really expensive, so you know, you don't see this card played a whole lot. Supply front, not a very good unit, or not a very good order rather. I mean, if you have the front line and you can buff all of your guys in the front line for 5 credits, it's really expensive, so it's hard to get good value on this one for at the 5 credit cost. So you really never see this card played ever. And the P-51 Mustang deployment gives enemy units +1 operation cost. So you put out this plane with a 6'4" body, it'll trade okay because it is a 6 offense, 6 attack damage, but only 4 health, which makes it a little weak. So it doesn't. This one doesn't really trade up in my opinion. And the deployment effect is pretty situational. The enemy has to have air units on board, or else you really don't get any of the deployment effect. And that deployment effect really is why the cost is increased, right? So that you know, you get that value as well. But there's really, you're not going to get that value because the odds of there being an air unit on the board are pretty low. So that's an overview of the starter cards. Not the best USA cards. Obviously, the game's not going to give you all the best cards for free right out of the gate. They're going to make you work for it. So with that, let's jump into the starter deck that they give you, which is the USA Japan starter deck, and go through how that looks. Alright, so here we have the USA starter deck. So they chose to give you Japan as an ally in the starter deck that comes pre-built. Obviously these decks are just there and you could delete them if you want straight out, or you could play with them, fidget with them and change them how you want, but let's just go over how they actually built it for you. So what they've done is they've added Japan as an ally, and they've got a bit of a mix in here of the Japan control elements with amphibious assault, destroying an enemy that has 3 or less attack, and the naval operation, deal 1 damage and pin all the enemies. So they're throwing in 3 cards here that are sort of control oriented, and a bit of aggression, aggro with the Kitas, with the blitz, the 2/1 blitz, and the deal 2 damage to random enemy. At the 2 cost there, it's a pretty good aggro card, early game blitz and destruction card. And they throw in the Hayabusas, 3 of these at 4 costs, so more burn, dealing 2 damage to HQ when they die, and the Zeros. And the Zeros are a very, very good plane. They are probably S tier for Japan in terms of aircraft, and the deployment effect of deal 1 damage can hit the HQ as well as a unit. So you do get that extra little bit sort of a burn, if you will, if you're going to use the deployment to hit HQ. But more often you could just use that to ping a unit and bring their HQ, their health down to a level maybe to not cover an ambush, or just to be able to have them trade with one of your units so that they die as well. And obviously with the ambush on the Zero makes it pretty strong, because you have to be able to have more than 4 health on your own unit when you attack it, or else the ambush will kill you. So that's a very strong plane. But in general, not all the best synergies here with the Japanese cards. You're just looking at really the control cards, I think, being really helpful. So the USA ones they include, so they got USACs in here, not bad. I mean, this has some synergies with maybe with your battalion, your Greyhound, and some of your other infantry units down here. But realistically, you know, that's all they're going to be able to play on. I mean, you could buff a Sherman to a 5.5, that's pretty good. They got the 463 in here, that's a good card. We talked about AWOKEN GIANT, the effect that that has. The Greyhound in this deck plays well. I mean, you blitz that to the front line. You got the Howitzer in the support line, the 75mm, if it lives, with only the 1 health on it, not likely to live very long, unless you could really shelter it from a good solid front line. What else? You got the Warhawk, and your Zeros and your Hayabusas that'll all benefit from the buff off of the Greyhound. So that's definitely good synergy there, and that's not bad. But other than that, it's really not a lot of other synergies. There are really a lot of sort of vanilla cards here, not vanilla, but standalone. Like, there's not a lot of chemistry between all these cards. So this deck doesn't play very good in my opinion. When I was starting off with this deck and playing it, I tried it a few times. I didn't record these games to show you, but really wasn't getting very far with it. You might get past private with it, you know, get your first 5 wins, and maybe a little bit into captain, but after that, it gets pretty challenging with this deck. I found that it didn't play very good. The units go out sort of standalone, and you're just trying to trade value for value, and you know, other people will have more cards than what you have, and it makes it a lot harder to trade and a lot harder to play this deck. So what I have done is, as I said, I've accumulated cards over the course of the first month of playing and was able to transform my USA deck into a much better USA starter deck that was able to sweep all the way through to Field Marshal. So without further delay, let's go take a look at that deck. It'll be a little more exciting. Alright, so here is the new and improved USA deck. Now, I've gotten rid of Japan as an ally, and I've gone with Soviet. What I found with the USA cards that we have to start off with are that it's a very slow moving deck. Like, there's not a lot of pushing available with it, if you know what I mean. Like, it just didn't move very well, and I found that I was very often getting overwhelmed by the opponent, where their larger units were able to come and overwhelm me and push me back, and then I was losing a lot, or losing 50-50 or whatever. And so I said, I got to come up with a way to be able to go after these units in the support lines when they get deployed, so I could try to kill things faster when they get deployed and have more of a punch. And as I was starting to unlock cards and build out my deck, I started to look at it as artillery being a very good format to take. And so looking at something like Patriotic Firestorm and an artillery deck with Greyhound, I thought this deck could really work. And so I started to look at what I had available from cards that I got and how much resources I had to be able to craft things. It didn't happen overnight. It took about a week or two, but then I was able to put everything together to be able to create this deck that basically went undefeated from 1-star captain to Field Marshal. I lost 2 games in that whole stretch. And so here I'll share that deck with you. You could craft this deck. So this deck costs 768 resources total. That's if you were to craft every single card from scratch, and that includes 1 elite. I was lucky to get a strategic bombing as a reward in a draft that I did. So that card, kind of hard to replace. There's not a lot of other cards that do anywhere remotely near what strategic bombing does. This card is pretty S tier. Dealing 3 damage to all targets in the enemy support line. The enemy loses a credit slot. We'll often say don't craft elites because 320 hammers and resources to craft 1 card when you can craft 4 specials probably isn't worth it. But this is a pretty darn good card, and we'll get a lot of value. So if you did have the resources, I don't know, I can't recommend to craft an elite. It's really not a good idea. If you are lucky enough to get strategic bombing, though, it fits really well in this deck. If you don't have it, we'll have to figure out a substitute. I'm not sure what that is, to tell you the truth. I was looking through all of the collection here between USA and Soviet, and I could not figure out what would remotely come close. So you might look at something like maybe swapping out a Soviet card and putting in another removal, maybe critical hit, because you could ping something with an artillery and then hit it with crit hit, and that would kill it. But again, it's not going to do the damage on the whole support line, and the enemy loses a credit slot. So, I mean, this is a pretty good card. But everything else is pretty solid. So what I'll do is I'll take you through my deck of how I built, what I got here built, and then right after we'll go to the next screen and I'll show you which cards you have to craft to make this deck. So the difference between what you have in your starter sets versus what you need to be able to complete this deck and how much that cost to do so. All right, so here we got artillery. We're going to have 37mm anti-aircraft gun. It's a 1-drop artillery with a 1/1. It helps you get a card out on turn 1 if you can get that out there. It's your 1-drop. And if you get it out later and the enemy has planes, that +2 operation cost to the enemy planes could be pretty crippling. And but otherwise, it's just a 1-drop to have something on there if someone's coming at you, like Japan or something, for example. Which I keep referencing Japan because there's a lot of Japan aggro in the world right now of this game. And so, and they all, a lot of them got 1 health. So this is actually a good starting card. If you go first, you drop this down. If they play up the 2/1 blitz infantry, you can kill it. And no harm, no foul there, and it's taken care of. Patriotic Firestorm. So your support line units have +2 attack until the end of turn. So this is a temporary buff. It will just give everything on the support line +2 attack. And that's it. So all your artillery +2. Very huge. This is a game-changing card, a momentum-changing card, your tempo, everything. It's an absolute staple to this deck. Not only to your artillery, though, any unit in the support line. So if you play this card, say you got your Sherman in the support line, that's a 4/4. Your Sherman's now a 6/4. You could bring it up to the front as a 6/4 and attack. The buff will stay on as the unit moves from support line to the front line and attacks at the enemy lines. The AWOKEN Giant, like I said, this card here, it just fits for now because of the collection, the way that it is. Eventually this card will slide out. I don't think it'll be very useful in the end, but for now it actually plays okay. It helps clear the front line for you, move you to get your Greyhounds to the front and things like that, and will trigger a card draw every now and then too if you can set it up properly. Bloody Sickle is a top-notch Soviet card. This is a snap include in every Soviet deck. It's just the cantrip effect of getting a card. It replaces itself plus deals a damage. You picture somebody playing the anti-aircraft and then a Bloody Sickle or all those Japan units, anything with 1 health. This thing just takes care of business. It's a great card and you get a draw out of it at the same time, and it doesn't have to kill it. You just pings a damage and you get a card to replace it. It's a great card. The Greyhound we talked about a lot already. Obviously with an artillery deck, the Greyhound's a staple. You got to have it in there. Get this guy out to the front line, buff your whole support line with the +1. If you can get multiple Greyhounds to the front, then you get a real good compounding effect and you could really deliver a big punch. Just keep in mind that you got to have a slot open on your support line. So put down 3 artillery, leave the 4th slot open, and it leaves you room to blitz your Greyhound to the front. And so then we get into the artillery, the 45mm anti-tank gun that the Soviets have. This is a great artillery to have. It's only a 2-drop and it has +2 against tanks, so it does a lot of damage against tanks and slows them down. So it's a great card to have in there. The Katyusha, this is a good artillery still. It used to be a 0 operation cost, but now it's a 1 operation cost, but it's still a solid artillery. So I threw this in here. You drop this down. If you do this on turn 3 with the blitz effect, it's super nice, and you get the 1 damage guaranteed, but then you get the coin roll, the RNG effect on whether or not it'll deal 1 extra damage. So you got to plan your turns a little bit, where maybe you attack with Katyusha first, see if you get the +1 out of it. If you do, it changes your strategy. If you don't, then you got to adjust your strategy the other way. And just the worst thing you could do is attack with this last and see that you get the proc on the +1, and then you wasted a credit maybe doing something else when you could have let the Katyusha do its thing and saved you that credit on some other unit, like attacking maybe with your other 45mm, for example. So the 17th Infantry Regiment. So it's just a 2/2 body for 2 costs. It's a pretty vanilla in terms of stats, but the deployment effect, give another friendly unit +1/+1. That's really what this card's in here for. You lay down your artillery, you drop this guy down, you buff your artillery. That's his job. So that's why he's in here. Makes your artillery pack a bigger punch. You start buffing your Katyushas and stuff like that, and now it's doing a 2, maybe 3 damage, plus the proc for the extra. It just becomes where your opponent can't deal with all this artillery on the support line. It's unmanageable. T19 Howitzer we talked about, removes guard, so he's in there to help get rid of guard. Now keep in mind, artillery can attack anything except for smokescreen, right? So even if there's a guard, the artillery can still attack the HQ. We don't care about guards, we just keep hitting face. But if you have other units in the front that you want to hit face with, you tap the guard with the T19, and now all your other units can hit face because the guard is removed for the duration of that turn. First Marines was just a lucky draw in a pack that I had. This is a very good US infantry. It has blitz effects, so it could blitz right into the front line, and when it does move into the front line, it gives a smoke screen until your next turn, so your opponent cannot attack your HQ while the immediate turn after he moves into the front line. So, and with a 3/4 body at 3 cost, 1 operation cost, is just a very good unit. Again, the F4F WILDCAT, just happened to get these from packs as well, and this card here, when you lay it down anywhere on the board, or whether it's on the support line or if you moved it up for whatever reason, it gives your HQ a smoke screen while he's on the board, so the opponent has to kill this plane before he can kill your HQ. The half-track, an enemy air infantry unit must retreat. So this is another card where you start to look at why overwhelming force becomes less effective. Between the howitzer and the half-track can bounce a unit back into a guy's hand or retreat it. So if it's on the support line, it'll go to his hand. If it's on the front line, it'll drop back to the support line. And in that case, you basically get a great effect because it's a huge tempo swing. If you just played 4 credits down to play a guard and you bounce it back into his hand, you kick his face in, and then he's got to play the guard again and spend all those credits again. So you basically make his guard cost twice the amount of credits. Naval Bombardment, again, just a card that I happened to get from a pack, so I threw it in the deck because this is a great card. It's, again, send a unit to the owner's hand, and this is all about clearing the board so that we have control and we can keep our artillery alive. Because this type of deck is really dependent on the artillery being alive, and I just clicked that, so it just bounced off the screen there, but it's Naval Bombardment. Also, I'll add it back in real quick here. It also only costs 2 credits instead of 4 if your opponent has the front line. So for only 2 credits, you can send a unit off the front line back into a unit to your opponent's hand, which is pretty cool. The M8 Howitzer, again, another good artillery. When you deploy, it does 3 damage between all enemies. This could be all 3 to the HQ. It could be all 3 to one unit, or it could be 3 spread out all over the place. You just don't know. It's completely random, and it does include the HQ. But it definitely has a nice effect to deal out that 3 damage. And then you have another artillery on the support line. And strategic bombing we talked about at the beginning. So that's the deck. Again, it costs a total of 760 resources. And now what I'll do is I'll go over the specific cards that you need to craft to make this deck. Alright, so here's the list of cards that from the starter deck to this artillery deck, Patriotic Firestorm deck. You will not have all these cards right now that I'm showing you, so you'll have to craft them. Now, it's going to cost you 644 resources to craft this deck. That includes the elite. So if you take out the elite of 320, this is a 324 resource deck for you to be able to create it, minus strategic bombing, which you'd replace with something else. Now, keep in mind that just from achievements alone, if you play 900 units, you get 50 resources. So if you do 900 units across all 5 nations, you get 250 resources. That's already almost enough to build this whole deck and get yourself to a USA Field Marshal. So what you need to do to build this deck is you need to create 1 Awoken Giant. And sorry, before we go on, there's lots of room for flexibility in some of these cards, right? Awoken Giant, there's flexibility. And some of the other cards, there's some flexibility as well. And so if you don't have these exact ones and you have other ones, don't craft these ones. Replace it with what you have and make the synergy work the way that it's intended to work and still get the sort of same effect that you would have, but save your resources. It's like Awoken Giant, don't craft it if you have something else that you can replace it with, because it's not a fantastic card, and crafting it now, you're not necessarily going to need it later. And it's only a standard card, so you're going to pay 8 resources for it, and then you'll likely open it in a pack next week, right? So that's the other thing in crafting standards, is that obviously every pack has 4 standards and 1 limited minimum, so you're going to get a lot of standards faster. You'll need to craft 1 more Greyhound. You'll need 2 37mm anti-aircraft gun. And again, if you have other artillery, you can replace it, but keep in mind your curve, right? Keep in mind that you want to make sure you have the 1 drops and the 2 drops in there so that you get artillery down early. The key is that you need to get artillery set up somewhat soon so that the opponent doesn't have time to take over the board and kill your artillery as soon as you play it. With the exception of Katyusha, artillery has to play and then it can't attack till the next turn. So you really want to be careful and protect your artillery, which is kind of what makes this one useful, because it is a 1 drop. So you can get an artillery out there right away on turn 1. The Patriotic Firestorm, you'll have to craft 3 of these because you don't get any of them. And this is the huge punch that you'll be able to give to your opponent. This is a finisher. This is a clearing of big units. I mean, if you put this on the M8 Howitzer, you're packing a 4 punch. I mean, this just allows you to wipe your opponent away. And with artillery being able to hit and not take damage back, it's just overpowered, really. The Bloody Sickle, you'll need 2 more of those. The T19, you need 1 of those. The 2 more 17th Infantries. Katyushas, 2. And again, I've got these from packs. I might have crafted 1 actually, but if I get another Katyusha, I would throw it in here and I would take something else out because the Katyusha is that good. I would probably take out a T19 and replace it with the Katyusha because the stats are similar. It's missing a health, but the Katyusha could pack more damage. So I would definitely do that if I got another Katyusha. The F4F WILDCAT, you can craft 2 of those. 16 HALF-TRACK, this is a good card to craft. He plays in this unit plays in a lot of decks throughout the game for a long time. So this is a bit of future proofing with this card here. As of now, there'll be other expansions, but as of right now, this is a future proof card. The HALF-TRACK is good. First Marines, future proofed, good card. Naval Bombardment, hit or miss. I wouldn't say it's a future proof card, but it's a good card. Definitely like to have some bounce in there. The Sherman's fully future proof. You'll need 1 of those. Oh yes, that's 1 First Marine, 1 Naval Bombardment, 1 Sherman. The Death from Above, 2 Death from Above. Fill up the Death from Above as soon as possible. This is a future proof card right now. Definitely super useful. The M8 Howitzer, great card for the extra damage that it does and everything, but not a must have. If you do have an M8 howitzer, throw it in there. If you have a different artillery, throw it in there. And then obviously strategic bombing, pretty impossible to replace, so do your best with that if you don't have it. So that's basically all the cards you're going to have to craft. So with all of that, let's start taking a look at some games. I've got all my games from Captain all the way to Field Marshal recorded, so I'm going to play those for you now, and you can watch the Undefeated series go all the way to Field Marshal with this awesome artillery Patriotic Firestorm budget deck. Enjoy.